Donald Trump thought he could bully Canada into submission with his latest tariff tantrum, but Prime Minister Mark Carney just proved that sometimes the best defense is a masterful offense. While Trump was busy throwing economic punches, Carney was playing chess, and now the former president's aggressive trade strategy is crumbling before our eyes. It all started when Trump, in typical fashion, decided to escalate his trade war with Canada by bumping tariffs from 25 to 35% on August 1st. The move was classic Trump, loud, aggressive, and designed to force Canada into a corner. He cited what he called Canada's lack of cooperation in stemming fentanyl flows and their retaliatory measures as justification for the increase. But here's where Trump's strategy began to unravel. While he was busy chest-thumping about his tariff increases, the data tells a completely different story. Canada accounts for only 1% of fentanyl coming into the United States, a fact that completely undermines Trump's entire justification for the tariff hike. It's almost as if Trump decided to wage economic war based on alternative facts rather than reality. Carney's initial response was measured but firm. He expressed disappointment with Trump's decision, but maintained Canada's commitment to the CUSMA free trade agreement. What Trump didn't realize was that Carney wasn't just responding, he was strategizing. The Canadian Prime Minister understood something that Trump clearly didn't, that 93% of Canadian goods still cross the border tariff-free under the existing trade agreement.
They had a private meeting there on the sidelines of the summit, and it seemed to go pretty well. That was a sign that Canada was making progress of kind of repairing or smoothing over some relations with Mexico that may have gotten rattled in the early days of Trump's second presidency when he imposed those tariffs, the fentanyl tariffs, on both Canada and Mexico. And then Ontario Premier Doug Ford came out and suggested that Canada should essentially drop Mexico as a trading partner and focus on a negotiation with the United States.
While Trump was celebrating what he thought was a victory, Carney was already 3 moves ahead. The Canadian government began implementing what can only be described as a masterclass in economic diplomacy. Instead of escalating the conflict, Carney chose a different path, one that would ultimately expose the fundamental weakness in Trump's approach. This strategic approach extended beyond just trade numbers. Carney recognized that both Canada and Mexico were facing similar challenges from Trump's aggressive tariff policies. Rather than allowing Trump to divide and conquer, Carney moved to strengthen bilateral relations with Mexico, understanding that a united front would be more effective than isolated responses. Both nations were dealing with Trump's fentanyl tariffs and sectoral tariffs on industries like auto, steel, and aluminum, creating natural common ground for cooperation. The first sign that Trump's strategy was failing came in the form of criticism from his own Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. Lutnick pointed out that Canada was one of only 2 countries to actually retaliate against Trump's tariffs, the other being China. This wasn't the flex Trump thought it was. Instead, it highlighted how isolated his approach had made the United States, with only Canada and China willing to stand up to his economic bullying. But Carney's real strategic genius became apparent in late August when he announced that Canada would be dropping some of its retaliatory tariffs effective September 1st. To the casual observer, this might have looked like capitulation. Trump certainly seemed to think so, calling Canada's decision nice in a press conference. But this was exactly what Carney wanted Trump to think. The reality is that Carney's move was a calculated strategic retreat that actually strengthened Canada's position. By removing tariffs on CUSMA-compliant goods, Canada was essentially matching the carve-out that Trump had already made for Canadian products. It was a mirror move that eliminated one of Trump's key talking points while maintaining pressure on the sectors that actually matter. More importantly, Carney kept Canada's counter-tariffs on the industries where Trump's policies were doing the most damage: steel, aluminum, and automobiles. These are the sectors where American tariffs were having real impact, and by maintaining pressure here while appearing conciliatory elsewhere, Carney forced Trump into a corner. The strategic brilliance of this approach became clear when you look at what happened next. Instead of continuing to escalate, Trump found himself in a position where further aggression would make him look unreasonable. Carney had effectively called Trump's bluff by showing that Canada was willing to be reasonable while maintaining its core interests. But Carney wasn't done. In early September, he unveiled a comprehensive economic strategy that completely flipped the script on Trump's trade war.
From reporters after meeting with top officials there to get a vital trade relationship back on track. Evan Dyer has been watching it all. So, Evan, can you bring us up to speed?
Adrian, the Canadian and Mexican leaders appear to have smoothed over the tensions that emerged following the election of Donald Trump when he succeeded in driving a wedge between the two countries with his tariff plans, causing some Canadian politicians to suggest that Mexico should be cut out of the CUSMA trade deal. These are two countries that face a common threat, and they seem to have decided they're stronger facing it together.
We are both undertaking massive transformations of our economy. Plan Mexico, Canada strong. Our efforts will be strengthened by working together.
Mexico and Canada want to do more on two fronts. First, work together to save North America-wide free trade by coordinating strategies for next year's review of CUSMA, the trade deal that replaced the original NAFTA 5 years ago.
How do we eliminate these tariffs that we both face prior to the end of the year so that we can have a fruitful discussion on the USMCA future beginning in 2026?
The two countries also have to cooperate without provoking the Trump administration.
They're going to be very careful to make sure that the visit is not portrayed as some kind of strategic meeting or ganging up in some way with the White House.
But both countries know they can't count on restoring normal trade.
The plan included a massive $5 billion fund to help businesses develop new products and find new markets, a Buy Canadian policy for government procurement, and extended employment insurance for workers affected by the trade disruptions. This comprehensive approach went even further. Carney embarked on a diplomatic mission to Mexico, meeting with Mexican officials to strengthen trade relationships amid the tensions with the United States. Both Canada and Mexico began coordinating strategies for the CUSMA trade review, with both countries seeking to deepen bilateral relationships and explore new trade partnerships. Mexico even expressed interest in expanding maritime trade with Canada, creating new economic opportunities that bypassed Trump's tariff threats entirely. This wasn't just economic policy, it was economic warfare at its finest. While Trump was trying to force Canada into submission through tariffs, Carney was building Canada's economic resilience and reducing its dependence on the United States. The message was clear: Canada could play the long game better than Trump could play the short one. The Buy Canadian policy was particularly brilliant because it turned Trump's own protectionist rhetoric against him. For years, Trump had been advocating for America First policies. Carney simply adopted the same approach for Canada, announcing that Canadian taxpayer dollars would be used to spur Canadian businesses for longer-term prosperity. Trump's reaction to these developments revealed just how much Carney had outmaneuvered him. Instead of the decisive victory he had expected from his tariff increases, Trump found himself dealing with a Canadian government that was not only standing firm, but actually strengthening its position. The phone call between Trump and Carney in late August, described as productive and wide-ranging, was essentially Trump trying to find a way out of the corner Carney had painted him into. The business community's response to the trade war further highlighted Trump's strategic failures. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business, WE, welcomed Carney's tariff removal, noting that Canada's retaliatory measures were almost as damaging as the U.S. tariffs themselves. This wasn't a criticism of Carney, it was an acknowledgement that his strategy of targeted retaliation had been effective in creating pressure for resolution. Meanwhile, American businesses were feeling the pinch from Trump's policies. U.S. liquor producers were putting pressure on the Trump administration to end the tariffs, highlighting how Trump's trade war was hurting American industries as much as Canadian ones. This is exactly the kind of domestic pressure that Carney's strategy was designed to create. Perhaps the most telling sign of Trump's strategic failure was his administration's shifting justifications for the tariffs. What started as a response to fentanyl trafficking morphed into complaints about Canadian retaliation, which then became concerns about border security. This kind of moving goalpost strategy is typically a sign that the original rationale wasn't holding up under scrutiny. Carney, meanwhile, maintained a consistent message throughout the crisis. Canada was committed to the CUSMA agreement, willing to negotiate in good faith but would not be bullied into submission. This consistency contrasted sharply with Trump's erratic approach and made Carney appear as the more reasonable party in the dispute. The ultimate proof of Carney's strategic success came in the form of Trump's inability to secure the kind of comprehensive trade deal he had been demanding. Despite all his bluster about being the world's greatest deal-maker, Trump found himself stuck with a partial agreement that left most of the existing trade relationship intact. Carney's approach also had the added benefit of strengthening Canada's position for the upcoming CUSMA renegotiation scheduled for next year.
The Prime Minister's rare presence in Washington, both in terms of the U.S. administration and the economic troubles. Well, his absence was noted a great deal in Washington. When did he go for the last time to Washington, and when will the PM start seriously going to the capital city of our main partner and make it a priority, rather than talking about infrastructure that won't even be put in place until the end of Mr. Trump's term? Mr. Speaker, the U.S. President is a modern man. I speak with him regularly. We send each other text messages. But what's the most important right now for Canada is to diversify our trade internationally with Europe, in Asia, with Africa, and South America.
By showing that Canada could weather Trump's economic pressure while maintaining its core interests, Carney established Canada as a reliable but firm negotiating partner rather than a pushover. This diplomatic strength was evident in parliamentary discussions, where Carney defended his modern approach to international relations. When criticized for not spending enough time in Washington, Carney emphasized that he maintained regular communication with the U.S. President through phone calls and text messages. More importantly, he argued that Canada's priority should be diversifying trade internationally with Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America, rather than focusing solely on the U.S. relationship. This strategic vision of trade diversification represented a fundamental shift in Canada's economic planning. The contrast between the two leaders' approaches couldn't have been starker. Trump relied on threats, ultimatums, and public pressure campaigns. Carney used measured responses, strategic concessions, and long-term planning. While Trump was playing checkers, Carney was playing chess, and it showed in the results. Trump's failure in the Canada trade dispute also highlighted broader problems with his approach to international relations. His strategy of using economic pressure to force quick concessions might work with smaller, more vulnerable countries, but it proved ineffective against a sophisticated economy like Canada's that had the resources and strategic thinking to respond effectively. The irony is that Trump's aggressive approach actually strengthened Carney's domestic political position. By positioning himself as the defender of Canadian sovereignty against American economic bullying, Carney was able to build public support for policies that might have been controversial under different circumstances. The Buy Canadian policy, for example, could have been criticized as protectionist under normal circumstances. But in the context of Trump's trade war, it appeared as a reasonable defensive measure. Looking at the broader implications, Carney's successful handling of Trump's trade pressure has established a template for how middle power countries can effectively respond to economic coercion from larger neighbors. The combination of targeted retaliation, strategic concessions, and domestic economic strengthening proved more effective than either complete capitulation or total confrontation. Trump's failure with Canada also raises serious questions about his broader trade strategy. If he couldn't successfully pressure America's closest ally and largest trading partner into submission, what does that say about his ability to negotiate with more distant and less cooperative countries? The Canada case study suggests that Trump's reputation as a master negotiator might be more myth than reality. The timing of these developments is also significant. As Trump considers another presidential run, his handling of the Canada trade dispute provides a clear example of how his approach to international relations can backfire. Voters who are concerned about America's standing in the world have a concrete example of how Trump's aggressive tactics can be successfully countered by more sophisticated opponents. For Carney, the successful navigation of Trump's trade pressure has established him as a formidable international leader, capable of standing up to much larger powers. His ability to maintain Canada's interests while avoiding a destructive trade war demonstrates the kind of strategic thinking that will be valuable as global trade relationships continue to evolve. The ultimate lesson from this trade dispute is that bluster and threats are no substitute for strategic thinking and careful planning. Trump came into the conflict expecting quick capitulation based on America's economic size and his own reputation as a deal maker. Instead, he found himself outmaneuvered by a Canadian Prime Minister who understood that patience, consistency, and strategic thinking could overcome raw economic power. As the dust settles on this latest chapter in U.S. Canada trade relations, it's clear that Mark Carney has emerged as the winner. He protected Canada's core interests, strengthened the country's economic position, and demonstrated that Trump's much vaunted negotiating skills are no match for careful preparation and strategic thinking. For Trump, the Canada trade dispute serves as yet another reminder that his approach to international relations often creates more problems than it solves. In trying to bully Canada into submission, Trump instead created a case study in how his tactics can be successfully countered. And that's a lesson that other world leaders are sure to remember.